So hopefully the Canvas stuff is all straightened out. So if you get on there for this week, you should be able to see today's attendance. And again, just like we did on Monday, you can either turn in a piece of paper or you can fill it in. I know last time it cut some people off because I was messing with the settings so that everybody could see the short papers, but I was able to see if people had started it, so it was easy to do attendance that way. Even if I couldn't see all your answers, which is kind of upsetting. But for your attendance today, before we get started, please answer this question. How have organizations had to change over the last 20 to 30 years? And what has been the impact of change? Well, in a way to kind of get that conversation going, what has been the impact of the change in technology on organizations? So take a few minutes, either write that down or answer it in Canvas. And just at least one person confirmed to me that you can indeed see it in Canvas. Yes? Okay, awesome. I'll just take about one more minute here, please. These don't have to be massive paragraphs or anything, but just a couple of things. All right, so just somebody, anybody, in what way have organizations had to change in the last 20 to 30 years? Pretty broad question, I think.
Honest, so they have to actually take into consideration the stakeholders, not just the sheriff.
Okay. Do you think like the American consumer is more demanding almost?
Like they can take more people, like the stakeholders more into it
Mhm.
than just the CEOs and the shareholders, like more transparent and everything.
Okay. Do you have anything that you think happened in the last 20, 30 years that made that prevalent? Yeah. Enron's always the first one people say. That's true. All right. Anybody else? Good answer. So more transparent, more upfront with financials and everything. Sustainability. Oh, like environmental impact. Okay. I thought you meant like organizational sustainability. And I was like, oh, I hope organizations are always trying to live for a long time. But okay, yes, going green. There's definitely been a swing in public view and perception about the environment and now that being very important, and we care. Whereas before you could just burn fossil fuels and blow black smoke out of the top of your factory and nobody cared at all. Anybody else?
The expansion
Uh,
of their pricing models, marketing models, after the flows of just
okay.
so.
Is there any way you can expand on? Because that's a good point. We're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, it's kind of a really broad point, but I
It
think
is, yeah.
it's shaped almost every way that companies face with the consumer. Really, I mean, in terms of our I mainly focused on in the answer just e-commerce and their price models,
Mm-hmm.
and moving more towards volume price models,
Okay.
lower prices.
Yeah, we're going to talk about e-commerce actually here in a few slides. If you look ahead, there you go. All right, anybody else? Or in particular, even the impact that technology's had on organizations? Or if you look at the chapter's title, where this conversation is eventually going to go. One more answer, and then I'll move on. Yes, for sure. For sure, for sure. I mean, how quick are we going through products and everything now? When I was a kid, I remember there being like a big video game release, and it was like a big deal all year. We like look forward to this like one game, and now I feel like these companies have to pump out these games every year and like every 3 months and all that stuff. And if you're not constantly adapting and changing, then they die and like you move on. Because my kids are all excited for like 4 different games coming up, and I'm all excited. But so the technology and the flow and speed of information is going to be a big part of this conversation. So today, I'm not going to talk about system viewpoint. We're going to talk a lot about globalization and where technology has kind of pushed us. So beforehand, when you sold products, you typically, if you were selling a service, obviously you're selling it in-house. But if you're selling physical products, they have to be delivered. They're often done only to the immediate area. And if you are selling them outside of your immediate area, they're having to be transported, right? And the people that are buying from you are buying over the phone, or they're buying in person or whatever, and you tend to stay very regional, okay? Because communication overseas, and the farther you get away, the slower communication, right? And over the last 20, 30 years, I mean, it's super picked up. I mean, when I started, even my undergrad, my phone still had buttons on it, like that I could physically press, right? And now I have this amazing smartphone that's as powerful as the laptop I had when I first started out. And essentially, we've gone from these mom and pop shops that are now selling downtown aren't just selling to Collinsville, Oklahoma, but they can literally sell to anybody around the world very easily. Creating your own website is easier than ever. Selling on Amazon is easier than ever. And so our markets are much more interconnected than they used to be. So globalization simply means the trend for the world economy to be moving more towards an interdependent system. Now, ultimately, this is good for everybody. Like in the world, it's ultimately better if the entire system is this more interconnected single system. For the United States, it's better in some ways and worse than others, because the United States was often seen as like this capitalism powerhouse, right? And as we start to share and interconnect, the massive advantage the United States had and some of the developed countries had start to kind of hedge and start to come back down, right? So in recent studies, they did an analysis of what they considered the most competitive countries, right? I want to make sure I call it the exact thing they called it. They called it global competitiveness. And what do you think the United States ranked in, quote, global competitiveness? What? Or see, we used to. Anybody else? Close. We were third. But we were behind 2 interesting countries. The countries the United States finished behind were Singapore and Switzerland. Now, I do want to be fair, because the book talks about that, so I bring that up. The reason is because the way the study measured competitiveness, they also include things like public systems and public financing. So that's things like healthcare for all, right? any sort of like government subsidies, and the United States doesn't provide those as much as like Singapore, Switzerland. So if you include that in the metric, it's obviously going to skew one way. Now, the United States used to be vastly above everybody else in GDP. Now, by some metrics of what we consider the quote richest countries, we rate somewhere between first and 10th, depending on how you rate the richest country. As an economics, originally an economics degree, and that's what I was originally doing all my research and studying in. GDP is one of the best ways to measure a country's, like how rich a country is or their output. And the United States right now, released as of 2017 when I pulled this last, and it's very similar today. We still rate first, but the gap is actually drastically narrowed. China's number 2, Japan 3rd, Germany 4th, India 5th, United States are United Kingdoms, France, Brazil, Italy, and Canada. I believe these are still stable as of today. I'm always careful with pulling more recent data because COVID really messed everything up. But the biggest thing to notice here is GDP growth, which is the United States is at around 2.27%, and China currently is almost at 7%. So our markets are becoming much more interconnected, and it's giving rise to what we call the global village. Now, the global village, literally, it's the shrinking of time and space. So it blows me away, absolutely blows me away, that I have a bunch of people in my field right now are doing interviews to get a professorship job, right? So typically you interview at the end of the fall and the beginning of the spring. That's when you do all your job interviews. Well, I have 2 friends that are teaching classes like currently at OSU, right? And on Friday afternoon, one of them flew from Oklahoma to New York and did interviews on Saturday in New York. So we're talking like a 12, 24-hour swing. Like they're teaching class physically in person here. 12 hours later, they are in New York. They are doing interviews in New York on Saturday. They come back on Sunday, prep class, Monday morning, do video interviews with schools in the UK and Australia, and then teach class in Stillwater, Oklahoma, Monday afternoon. Right? And so like in a 4-day period, they are physically other locations and virtually other locations and are able to interact with all these people. Right now, if I needed to teach a class in Singapore or China or anywhere, I could technically do it by the end of the week, for sure, right? And that used to be impossible. Or I could do it right now and just do it virtually. Jael, my wife, she works 100% from home, and her business's offices are in Texas, and her main clients are in LA and Florida, and she never has to leave the house. She works a 9-to-5 job. She does everything virtually, all of her meetings, everything is done online. She thinks brick and mortar businesses are complete bullshit. That's what she told me this morning. But her company also sells software, so like they have no physical product they have to push out. Now, the rise of e-commerce. This is especially benefiting, it's benefiting everybody. I think it's interesting on the impact that it has on small businesses. So like, sometimes I feel old because like I love Shark Tank, and our family goes through like Shark Tank binges where we like watch all Shark Tank at once and then like wait a year and then do it all over again. And every time I watch Shark Tank, I don't know why. I didn't like buying products online for a long time. Like I'll still buy on Amazon, but like I didn't like buying products for a long time and online. And every time I'm watching Shark Tank, everything they would ask these like small companies, and these guys are like making like scarves, or like there was a people that were there from Stillwater, and they basically sold university T-shirts, and they started with OSU apparel, and then now they were selling like other colleges shirts and stuff. And everything they ask him is like, where is most of your business being done? And literally, I mean, after watching every Shark Tank episode like 3 times, I'd play, if they're selling physical products, 60 to 70% of the time, they sell only online on their own websites. And they're like, oh, we sell completely online. How much did you last month? Oh, we did $300,000 in revenue. I was like, oh my gosh, these people are selling from their companies, right? The one out of Stillwater, they were really making their stuff in their garage had somebody that was printing stuff for them, packaging and shipping it out of their house, and we're selling $100,000, $200,000 worth of merchandise every like few months, right? And they can do it 100% online, all from their home. I still don't get it. I don't trust people with my credit card information. I hate going to websites and giving my credit card information. Unless they use PayPal, I won't do it. Because I really trust PayPal. Maybe I shouldn't. Yeah. My wife planned, we got officially married last year. And my wife planned our entire wedding essentially over the internet and over the phone. Never did anything in person, which is amazing to me, while working her job. And our wedding was live streamed to everybody because it was, because of COVID, we had some family that couldn't come. And our wedding was live streamed to everybody. But everything we bought for that wedding, except for her dress, was bought online, shopped for online, done through Zoom calls, and then sent to our house. It's crazy. Now, there are positives and there are negatives of this. Like two different effects there. What was that? What is that? Oh, OCD. Ooh, yeah. To talk about a fun things here. So you all know that as we become more interconnected, a lot of the jobs that a lot of people don't want to do are outsourced. And when they're outsourced, that leads to cheaper labor costs for organizations here, right? Which ultimately leads to cheaper products for all of us that are buying. There's obviously a bad side of this, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But because of this outsourcing, products are cheaper. It amazes me now that, like, when I was younger buying computers and stuff, because my dad used to build and like fix up computers, and they were so expensive. And now you can go to Walmart and honestly, for $300, can buy a decent laptop that will get you through college. And that's crazy. It all just becomes of the outsourcing. We can go to wherever makes it the cheapest, makes it, the best, the fastest. However, the downside of this is, one, there is a risk with associated markets. If we make everything in the United States, if we do everything here, if our people are building the products here, we're selling the products here, marketing, everything's done here, then something happening over in China or Russia or anything doesn't really directly affect us, right? As long as it doesn't affect our supply chain here, it doesn't matter, right? Our businesses keep on trucking. But if everything is interconnected, then if a war starts there and they primarily supply coffee beans, and Starbucks over here has an issue, right? And if something starts over here, or something starts over here, or over here is hit by a massive hurricane that affects the supply of Y, then the rest of the country is harmed. So the idea of this global economy is that everybody should focus on what they do best. Like the United States is the best at producing beef, and we're really good at producing software. So maybe we should focus on that, right? And every country focus on what they do best, and then we all trade and share. But that means if something happens to a country that specializes in X, then X may be in trouble. This also threatens information security, because it turns out that not all governments are nice. Do you guys know what happened with ByteDance and TikTok in the United States a few years ago? I love this story. So, China produces a lot of apps that we use here in the United States. Now, what's really interesting about the top selling Chinese apps, this is so interesting to me. The top selling Chinese apps, the majority of the users are American. So like they're really good at marketing to Americans. It's crazy to me. Which is also funny because the number one selling game, because again, I love video games. The video game that makes the most money in the world outside of like Minecraft is League of Legends. And that's produced here in the United States, but its primary clientele is in Korea and China. Like it's actually not that popular here. It's very popular overseas, but it's made here. They just came out with the Netflix series that did really well. It was really good. But TikTok is actually created by a company called ByteDance in China. And TikTok, 80% of its users were American at the time. So most of its users are here. Now, ByteDance was openly recording facial recognition talk, like recording people's faces, right, on their app, and then giving it to the Chinese government. Now, this isn't like a conspiracy theory. This is like very openly confirmed, right? Like the company was very open about this. So this happened. This would have been in 2017 or 18, I think. Had to be 18. 19? What year did the pandemic start? 20? 8? 19, 20? I don't know, somewhere there. I was teaching an ethics class while it was happening, so that's when we were talking about it every week. So they were recording people's faces, essentially, and then giving it to the Chinese government. And the United States was like, whoa, you can't do that. And the administration at the time and China started getting into it about this. We're like, you can't be giving Americans, personal information away. And because this is kind of part of this interconnected market, right? They're selling products to us, we're using products, all these things. And what ended up happening was the United States was like, ByteDance wanted to sell. And essentially we said, hey, you got to sell, and you need to sell to an American company, right? And the Chinese government stepped in and said, basically, no. If they sell, that's fine, but we get to maintain the data, like all the information, right? So a few companies stepped up, like Walmart and Facebook and Microsoft, and all were offering to buy ByteDance for this like massive profit, and then massive amount of money, not profit, massive amount of money. And the Chinese government was basically stepped in and was like, you can only sell it to a company that we approve of. And the United States said, well, if it doesn't sell, then we are going to ban TikTok, which I don't know if anybody here is on TikTok. There was a whole thing on TikTok about it getting shut down. And like, we got all the way up like to the day it was going to shut down, and then it didn't. Like literally, it was like 24 hours and this app was going to close. And the thing was, the United States was like, we're going to ban this. Well, this is bad for China because if this app is banned, ByteDance is worth billions of dollars. If it's banned in America, they collapse. They're done. All their users are gone. They will just shut down. And then on the other side, America is having these issues because people are stealing this information, right? Like they're stealing people's private information. There's really no strong competitor for TikTok at the time. I mean, Facebook and Instagram and everything, and YouTube have kind of integrated their own versions of TikTok. And then so what ended up happening in this story, because like it's just a bunch of strong arming, was ByteDance is like, no, you can't sell. Or the Chinese government's like, no, you can't sell. And then the Chinese government threatened to poison pill ByteDance, which basically means if you do sell, we're going to tax the crap out of ByteDance until they're worth nothing. And then when an American company buys it, the company will be basically in financial ruin. So now companies like Walmart and Facebook are like, whoa, I'm not going to buy it if they're just going to destroy the company before I own it. So we're going back and forth. And then America was like, fine, we're going to ban all Chinese apps. And then China was like, okay, if you ban all Chinese apps, we're going to ban all American apps too. And all your companies are going to collapse. And like, we're literally going back and forth. What ended up happening was, to my knowledge, an American company bought out the majority of ByteDance, but ByteDance was still had a large share of Chinese investors, but America hosts the data of American users. So like if you use Facebook or if you use TikTok, if it does record your face, at least the American government has it. But yeah, there you go. Fun story. Not 100% sure what the exact logistics of how it played out at the end were, because it got really muddy at the end, but it didn't shut down. Like they kept going. I think it was a lot of like show, because if a company like that shuts down, it's like bad for everybody. I mean, could you imagine like tomorrow if like Facebook just like stopped? What? Facebook?
Facebook shut down for like a day or so.
Oh, wasn't that? Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't remember what that was. And then finally, there's job loss. So in America right now, we are actually facing a skilled labor shortage. So going to college is great. Good job. It's because we tend to, a lot of our jobs, I mean, if we talk about things that aren't necessarily related to the fact that jobs are being given overseas, technological advances tend to get rid of certain unskilled labor. There's been a lot of like pushback on like, no, jobs won't be replaced by technological innovation. I will tell you, most studies show that there are, even though it's not the massive impact we think it'll be, there are jobs that are lost because of technological advancement, and it's significant. But in addition to that, we outsource jobs overseas, right? Now, when we outsource jobs overseas, the jobs that are left over here typically be skilled labor. And so because of that, we need more skilled labor than ever, and it continues to increase. And even though more people are enrolling in college, and more people are going to tech schools and trade schools and all that stuff and learning schools, because college isn't the only way to become a skilled labor, we still have these loss of jobs and a demand for more skilled labor that we don't have. So those are the negatives. Somebody's being really quiet. Do you know what ended up happening with TikTok? Because I'm so curious. I actually don't know like the pinnacle of that story. Besides, I know it was sold, and I know China still owns part of it, and I know they're not, to my knowledge, sharing our information anymore. No one? I followed it so closely for a while because it was like we talked about it a lot in my ethics class. Well, something to look up later. So we also have the rise of mega firms. I do want to talk about this a little bit because it's actually interesting. And mini firms. So I talked about mini firms earlier. Now what I mean by that is because of the internet, you can create a mom and pop shop and you can sell it all over the world very quickly. Yay. But also we have mega firms, as in companies are coming together, and you would be shocked. I'm sure some of you guys have seen pictures and diagrams of who owns what. And it's like amazing what Disney owns. Like they probably make these masks. Like I don't know, but it blows me away. Like I watched a really, really gory, I think it was a Saw movie. It was super terrible, like graphic. And the person next to me was like, yeah, Disney made this. And I was like, shut up. And they were like, no, it's made by Greystone. And Greystone's actually owned by Disney. It's just marketed differently because they can't be Disney. They have to be Greystone. I was like, oh my gosh. And I looked it up. They totally do. Like the same producers at Disney are like creating Saw. It's weird. We get this rise of mega firms. Now, there was a study when I got into my PhD about if you ask people like, do you want to be an entrepreneur, or is entrepreneurship on the rise? Do you know what the answer like unanimously was? Yes. Like I want to be an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurship's on the rise. People are becoming entrepreneurs. That's the way to go. It's not true. Entrepreneurship is actually on a decline. There are less small businesses, less people are being entrepreneurs. But shows like Shark Tank make it appear, and that was called like the Shark Tank effect. There was like this push to the front of the public of like, hey, you can be an entrepreneur because look at these entrepreneurs. But really what was happening was every entrepreneur in the world was on Shark Tank. So mega firms are on the rise, which leads to a lot of globalization because typically large organizations, you look at McDonald's, Walmart, Google, Disney, they have corporations all over the world, making them interconnected. But also because of this technological advance, it makes it easy for these mini firms to also sell overseas. A couple of definitions. I don't want to spend too much time on these. A multinational corporation is a business firm with operations in several countries. So that's things like McGraw-Hill that creates this book, or the largest American multinational corporation is Walmart, followed by ExxonMobil, Chevrolet. I'm trying to do it off memory, but I have a list. Apple, General Motors, Phillips 66, General Electric, and Ford Motor Company. There you go. In that order. Now, a multinational organization, so corporation, organizations, typically nonprofit. These are things like the World Health Organization and like International Red Cross. Now, the reason this matters so much, and we talk about it in Fundamentals of Management, even though I always tell people Fundamentals of Management is a lot about management. It's like 70% management, but it's also like 30% a general business class in my mind because of the material we cover. But the reason we care about it from the management side is because if any of you go work for a large company, it will probably not only be located in the United States. Like you will probably do some sort of dealings overseas. Which is funny that that's the standard, because it used to be you were only going to be dealing with people immediately around you. When I was in school, the like number one thing I was told during my MBA that would benefit me is if I was bilingual, and I'm not at all. So I tried to learn French. I'm working on it because I love food, and their food's awesome. I'm going to get good at French. I'm trying really hard. But being bilingual, I told you guys a little bit about Peter Oleg, who was a professor of mine, who went on to be a professor at Texas Tech. And he was 22 years old, making $1 million a year, which is pretty cool, and working for a liquid glass company, which again, I don't know what that is, but it's because he worked in Russia, and he was working for a company when he was like 18. And then while he was growing up, or not growing up, he was 18, 19, 20 working in this company. And then they started selling internationally, and they needed someone to be in charge of international marketing. And he spoke super good English. Like, he was in our class and he spoke really good English. Like, you couldn't even tell he didn't have a Russian accent. It was weird that he grew up in Russia. And he spoke really good English, and he always joked about that. But he spoke super good English, and they dealt a lot with Americans. And so they put him in charge of that at like 21, 22 years old. And then he made a ton of money. He was the one that was bribing train people. But he moved to the United States because, according to him, this is what he told our class. So if it's a lie, Peter Oleg, Texas Tech University, you can Google him. He said, the Russian government broke into my job one day and demanded our records for American clientele. And they told me if I refused to turn them over, they would falsify rape allegations against me. So he flew to the United States. He went to Penn State and got his master's degree. And the United States allowed him to stay here and not go back. That's what he did. And then he got his PhD at OSU. And he's the most interesting person I've ever talked to. I thought we were friends, and I ran into him at a bar one time, and I was like, Oleg! And he just like looked at me and then walked off, so maybe we're not friends. So now we'll talk about different types of being an international manager, and different types of managers. So an ethnocentric manager, these are typically managers that believe that their culture, their country, their whatever, their view of life is the best way to be, and that's what everybody else should do, right? This is more common than you think. It's actually difficult to get past because of biases, like unconscious biases you can't control. But parochialism, yeah, I said that right. It is essentially this view that you only view things through your own point of view. And the way I describe this to people is we all at this point have friends that are like super political one side or the other. And like to them, this side is like the only side. And like there can't be another side, whether you're like Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whatever, all over the board. It's like this side is the only side. But the fact that the other side has so many people that support it, you have to realize that obviously they have some point of view that you don't see if it makes no sense at all. And that's parochialism. It's the only being able to view something through your own perspective. And again, that's why you have people, I'm not making a political stance. It's just like, that's why you have people so ingrained in certain beliefs, right? And they can't change, they can't understand someone else's beliefs. Even if you don't agree with them, just the idea of being able to understand why someone else is that. I wasn't pointing at you. It looked just like I pointed twice, like I was telling you. Okay, good. Sorry, but pay attention. Just kidding.
I mean, I was looking at it.
I know. Just kidding. Now, polycentric managers, they tend to better understand other perspectives and kind of more adapt to the environment of where they are, like the culture they're around and everything, and more to like camouflage, morph into that. Now, looking at the two of these, generally the obvious like scream is you're like, okay, that's better if I'm working internationally. However, there are faults to that. Does anybody know what might be a problem? Yes, that can be very true. Then if you have to define what right is, though, because like, should I not bribe people? But like, everybody bribes people, and maybe that is okay. You know, like, who am I to say? But yes. So what if I am McDonald's, and McDonald's sells everywhere? And if you go to McDonald's in Stillwater and you go to McDonald's in Dallas, and I put them side by side, like I gave you guys pictures of McDonald's in Stillwater, and I gave you pictures of McDonald's in Dallas. Could you tell the difference? You think? Can you? I get kind of paranoid because I get this weird feeling when you walk into like a Walmart or McDonald's. It's like across the country, and you have this weird like feeling like you're home, like it like trips you out. So companies that expand internationally typically have to have had some sort of competitive advantage or success in whatever they're doing, right? And that doesn't always translate. So you do have to adapt to different cultures. Like, McDonald's has different menu items. They may handle people slightly different in different cultures. However, core competencies may need to be maintained, right? And if you completely adapt to a different culture and environment, you might lose the core of your organization, and that can cause a problem. So there is an issue, and you got to kind of strike a fine balance, which, of course, with everything in management, we have a gray area or a middle area, which is our geocentric managers. And that's the idea. Now, so much easier said than done. Sometimes I hate definitions. The definition of this is like, oh, yes, look at your home and look at your foreign policies and then just choose which one's most effective. Yes, easier said than done. But it's being able to strike a balance. And it's very possible. The companies that are the most successful do this very, very well. Apple's one. I don't use Apple anything, but I like what Apple has done. Apple does one thing extremely well, and that is that a lot of products and stuff maybe like have a lot of fans of them here and maybe be successful overseas, but not quite the same. Like Starbucks is like outrageously popular here as like a cultural symbol, but not maybe necessarily overseas, even though it may be successful, like do well. Apple, you can be like here and people like fan out over Apple, and then you can go like overseas and there's people like fanning out over Apple. So like they've done something well where they can mix a balance between hitting, staying close to what they are, which is like an expensive, clean product that runs efficiently, while also being able to somehow capture the market of different cultures. Pretty cool. Go Apple. And without Steve Jobs. So culture, which we're going to talk a little bit more now. Shared set of beliefs, values, knowledge, and patterns of behavior common to a group of people. That exact definition I've seen everywhere in 1,000 research papers. It's pretty standard. Now we have what are called low context cultures and high context cultures. I used to do lots of classes when I was like in my master's and stuff. And when I started working more in the industry, I did media management for a while for a company called Send the Light that provided water sources to companies overseas or to like villages in India. And we had to do lots of training about like different ways that the American businessman and woman act and how it's perceived overseas, which typically is that we're assholes. But that's like always the end of every class I've ever been in. They're like, we're jerks. But really, it kind of comes down to this low context and high context. So the United States and a lot of countries are what we call low context culture, which is like what you say and what you write is what you mean. Like, bam, very blunt. And high context culture is it really relies on situational clues, and it's good to know that, right? Now, we still have a little bit of it here in the United States. We're like, oh, no, you're fine. Stay as long as you want. But you ever get that feeling where, like, you stay somewhere because someone, like, offers you an invite, and then later you reflect on it, and you're like, oh, they didn't really want to invite me. I have, like, one incident with that stays with me for my entire life. I'm not going to share it because I'm embarrassed, but it stays with me. And I was like, oh, my God, why the hell did I leave? What was I thinking? I'm sure they all talk about me all the time now. And he's my dissertation chair. Gosh. Anyway. That probably doesn't show up very well. The screen's not as big as I was hoping it'd be. Sorry you can't see that very well. If you have it in front of you, there you go. So I put the current people at the top that are responsible for this right here. But this is from Globe. This is a different way it's a way to analyze like a country's culture and kind of understand where they fall on different metrics, and that kind of determines how you should act there, and essentially how your managers and employees should behave. This originally comes from Hofstede. So Hofstede created these dimensions of natural culture, and his original ones, you don't need to know this, his original ones were power distance, individualism and collectivism, uncertainty avoidance, masculinity versus femininity, long-term orientation versus short-term orientation, and indulgence versus restraint. The Globe Project took that and expanded it to this and kind of altered it slightly. And basically we have different things here like, so power difference, the degree in which a society's members expect power to be unequally shared. So like, are you okay with having a CEO that has all this power and control and you just listen? Or do you expect me as a low-level employee to have some sort of say in society? Or like, how assertive are people? Do people tend to be more timid, more assertive? Do we have massive gender differences? Or do our genders kind of more, we believe men and women can do the same things, are very equal? I gotta realize I can't change it on there. If you want to know what the United States tends to be highest on, I marked it here. Can't see it very well. We fall under the highest of being very assertive. The United States, we tend to be very assertive people. I read a cool study where they asked people like, what do you think about Americans? And it's like, describe an American, which is always really funny. And they all talk about really successful. This study came out last week. If you survey the majority of countries, they believe the average American makes 3 figures or more. Not the case, but it appears that way on TV. Americans tend to be very assertive and also performance oriented, as in your promotion, your status in society, however, is determined solely by what you can perform, like what you can do. That's what we care about. Like, what are you outputting for my company? I'm glad we don't fall on the low side of humane oriented. I just realized Singapore is on the lowest of humane oriented and then also considered the most competitive country globally. Dangerous message you're sending, Globe. So I talked about the positives and negatives. By the way, there's going to be some slides that are hidden because I knew I was going to talk about them, but I want you to have them. We have one more question I'm going to have you all talk about here in just a second. So why do companies expand internationally? Availability of supplies that may not be here, or they're cheaper somewhere else. Starbucks gets the majority of their coffee beans overseas. I love Starbucks' strategy. They go overseas. They produce all these environmentally friendly practices. And they go to small villages and they help them set up like coffee. What do you call them? Coffee fields? I don't know. They grow coffee beans. And they help these villages set this up where they can have this like sustainable economy. People have jobs, and Starbucks helps set that up. That's fantastic. Now they can advertise themselves as sustainable. They can also establish themselves as like doing lots of philanthropy. Like, we're helping the world. Look at us, right? But also, if anything happens to anybody else, Starbucks owns like thousands of small village coffee fields around the world. So their supply chain is very strong. Good job, Starbucks. New markets. So as you expand and you start to reach saturation, you have to go somewhere else and sell. There's a lot of Shark Tank people that get on there and they're selling something and people are like, yes, but you can only buy like one of these products ever and only certain people need it. So you're going to reach saturation soon. So you have to go somewhere else. Lower labor costs, access to financial capital. That includes things like foreign investors. And avoidance of tariffs and import quotas. Not illegal, just frowned upon. We're not going to actually answer these questions specifically right here, but COVID-19 obviously had an effect on globalization. In some ways bad. Well, in most ways bad. In some ways good. So real quick, take a second. How has the global pandemic, everybody's favorite subject to talk about, how do you think it might have impacted these 5 reasons to expand internationally? So we can start with number 1. How did the global pandemic affect the availability of supplies? Came to a standstill. Yes, it became much harder to get certain supplies. If a country that primarily, again, produces X has a severe outbreak and can no longer send people to work to manufacture X, we don't get X. Or we have to go to somebody else to get that supply, and it's more expensive. And not only is it more expensive because maybe this person wasn't the ideal partner in the first place, But there's not a strong supply line set up. I don't have flights every single day carrying this product. I've been doing it for years, right? I have to establish a new supply here. What about new markets? So that means I'm here in the United States and I think, okay, I need to go sell my product to this country I've never been before. By the way, if you guys haven't noticed, I started moving my slides over literally because of that projector, because I refuse to get up there and move it. So I'm going to do this. I'm out of tea. If I'm holding this, it's just like a safety thing. I have to do something with my hands. This one's a little bit more difficult, but you typically expand to new markets when you've kind of saturated here, or often when you're doing well. You know, it's more difficult to expand to markets if all of a sudden you start failing here. Like, you don't want to open, because it's expensive and it's dangerous to start somewhere else. Like, what if Apple started selling their phones overseas after selling in the United States? People are like, I hate this. I want a button. And it turns out it's just a cultural thing in the United States that we don't mind the screen. It's dangerous. And the last thing you want to do is take on risk. And then also, new markets to adapt the new product often have to have money. And if markets are shutting down and not doing well overseas, then maybe they don't have money. What about number 3? We're not going to talk about, we'll stop at 3. 4 and 5 are more self-explanatory, less direct, but it really affects 1, 2, and 3 a lot. How has the global pandemic affected our labor costs? Say again, I'm sorry? Yes, I actually don't know the solid answer to this. So, like, anybody can say, because in general, labor is more expensive right now because less people are working, and the ones that do work will be paid more because supply and demand exists all the time. I don't know the answer to this because in the United States, labor costs have definitely gone up. I don't know, again, as an economics background, if other countries maybe have less restrictions and more people that are trying to go back to work, it may be an avenue to actually move overseas now because labor is more expensive here. But also what's happening here is happening everywhere. So maybe the lower labor cost I was going to go get, I can't anymore. So I don't know. It's probably, the answer to this is probably it depends on the situation. Because I don't know. Maybe somebody here knows better than me. I don't have a solid answer to that. The first two are much more clear. The labor cost thing is so interesting to me. Like, you have all these companies shut down, but the cost of labor goes up. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's so backwards in my brain. My economics brain just got completely destroyed with the pandemic. Sucks. I started having to teach all my classes with 2 sets of slides. I teach an HR class where I talk about, like, all these HR policies. And then I have to add extra slides that are like, but since the pandemic, these policies. And they may not exist in a year. So, like, I can't just teach them as the facts now. So now we talked about why companies expand. We're going to talk about how. And then, let me double check here. Yes, we're going to talk about how and then call it. And I'll talk just a tiny bit about the exam next week, which we do have a room. So right here, these are all the different ways that companies can expand. I think most of you all will probably understand these at pretty face value. But from lowest risk investment to highest risk investment, because when you move overseas, it can be dangerous, risky. So the first two you see on here, in the lowest risk, we're going to go from lowest to highest. Global outsourcing, importing, exporting, counter trading. Global outsourcing is also called offshoring. Most of you guys probably know these definitions. It's literally using someone outside of your organization to produce or create, right? Whatever. You're offshoring your job. Nike's offshoring who's making their products. Importing, you're bringing goods into your country from another country. Exporting, you're sending goods outside of your organization to another country. And then counter trading is really literally a bartering system. I'm trading you these goods for those goods, right? That's the lowest risk, because if something bad happens with whatever company you're exporting or importing to, there's other people, right? Like you can export, import to other company. You don't have like necessarily as many ties with this country or this other company, as in like our employees aren't working in the same offices. This company over here operates solely independently. We operate solely independently here, and we're essentially trading services and goods back and forth. And if I lose my trading partner, I mean, that can suck and that can be bad. That can be very bad. Don't get me wrong, but it's less risky than what's coming up. So licensing and franchising, we'll start with franchising. Franchising is like all the McDonald's, all the Chick-fil-A's, all that stuff in the world. You're literally buying the rights to create another version of someone's company, right? So if someone overseas is franchising a Chick-fil-A or whatever, I don't know if Chick-fil-A is international. McDonald's, they're definitely international. They create another Chick-fil-A over there. Now, it's less risky, it can be not as risky in the fact that you have to take a proven set of concepts and apply them, and you're very restricted in what you can do, right? Because if you franchise a company, you have to sell what they tell you to sell. You typically got to sell at the prices they tell you to sell them at. They typically train you in a certain way, right? And also franchisees will typically, you'll be protected. So it's like if I buy a McDonald's franchise in this town, they won't necessarily sell another franchise to somebody else unless McDonald's determines that you have the space to do that. Like you can afford to do it without hurting them. Because it's beneficial to McDonald's if your franchise is successful. So they won't necessarily, they'll kind of protect you from cannibalizing yourself or getting cannibalized by your parent company. My phone thinks I'm talking to it. That creeps me out. Don't do that. Licensing is essentially you're buying the right. You're licensing a product where you don't own it, but you're licensing to use it, and you don't have the same protections as like a franchise. Like they can sell license. They can sell. Do you guys know what SPSS is? Statistical software. Okay, SPSS is statistical software. It's very expensive. OSU uses it. You have to license the product. It's made by IBM, and if you license SPSS, it's really powerful statistics program, but they can also sell it to other universities like around us all the time. And we can all use it to compete against each other. I don't believe last semester there wasn't a question on the difference between licensing and franchising. Some people get caught up on it, but don't get too caught up on the difference. Joint ventures are also called strategic alliances. In fact, most of the time in this class, I will use the word strategic alliance, not joint venture. And that is essentially going in with another company that's already where you're trying to move typically. So like if we're here in the United States, there's a company in China, and we decide that my company in the United States decides I want to open up another branch in China, or I want to open up a new company in China. I partner with a company in China that does something well, and I do something well, and then we work together and make it, right? Now, there's a little bit of a shared risk there, and I already have a company typically that's in the country I'm going to, so there's some benefit there. They already know the market, they're there. But it's still dangerous because like I'm there and I'm very much with a partner that if they fall out, then we're done. Now, it's not as dangerous as like a wholly owned subsidiary, which is like, I'm going to go overseas and I'm going to create a whole other company there, right? Like we're going to do this there, full expansion, no strategic alliance, all that jazz. That's the highest risk. Technically, the highest risk is what's called a greenfield venture, which is like an entirely new company, not like an expansion of a company. But, oh, good. I put that up there. I put the distinction. I'm not sure if the book makes that distinction, but they should. Beautiful. I was trying to get close before. So we can talk a little bit about, yeah. The last side that I think is important to really kind of cover right now. So barriers to things like imports and exports. If you guys don't know, which most of you guys are probably taking economics at this point, It is very beneficial for a country for them to produce their own stuff and sell stuff within there if they can do it the cheapest. That's great. And sometimes countries step in. I'm not trying to question anybody's intelligence here, but if you don't know, countries often step in and place things like import tariffs on something, and that is to make local companies more successful. So if Starbucks buys, I mean, this isn't what's happening, but if Starbucks buys all of their coffee beans overseas, and now here in the United States, nobody can grow coffee beans and be successful because they're just so much cheaper overseas. The United States could put an import tariff on the coffee beans coming in from overseas. So now, if the cheapest here in the United States, I can reasonably sell Starbucks coffee beans is at $2 a pound. And there's someone overseas that can sell it for $1.50 a pound. And it's like, I can't compete with that. The United States could add a 50-cent or $1 tariff to every pound in here. And then now all of a sudden, if you're Starbucks, it's like, well, it's cheaper or the same to stay local because of these tariffs. So these exist. They come in, they leave. Typically, when countries have good relations, they tend to drop these things to make them, more competitive. That's it. If you pay any attention to different political parties coming in and out of power, they drop and add embargoes and sanctions and tariffs and yeah. And then, of course, the big embargo on Cuban cigars was lifted X amount of years ago, and that was a huge deal. I have a friend that smokes a lot of cigars, and that was a huge deal. And you know what's funny? As soon as it was lifted, I still haven't seen a Cuban cigar anywhere. I don't hear anybody talk about it. I think it was more of like you couldn't touch it, so there was like forbidden fruit feelings to it. But, all right. So that's typically a lecture I do in two parts. I tend to spend a lot of time talking about things kind of around the subject we're talking about and important life applications, and then also some of the stuff like more definitional stuff. I try to be more direct with these chapters because of time. But Monday, we are going to do a review for the first exam because it came up really quickly. I know. So the first exam is Wednesday. Just again, it's going to be in person at a computer. You'll have to have your login information for OSU. So like if you have to change your password over, it's another, they like ask for your firstborn son if you forget to change your password in time. It's like such a hassle. I hate that they can't use the same old password. I get so spiteful about that every time I change my password, I go in there and I change it to 4 different passwords in a row so that I can go back to my original password in the same 5 minutes. So I had the same password for 10 years. Take that, OSU. Super not safe. But so make sure you can log into your OSU. You may hear some, if you know other people in management, they're going to ask for IDs at the door. We are not going to do that here because this section's smaller and I know everybody's faces with masks on for the most part. I'm doing my best. So you don't need an ID or anything. Just make sure you can log in. You'll take it on the computer. It's 50 questions long. You have 50 minutes. The average time is like 25 minutes, and most people get through pretty quick. On Monday, I'll go over things that are going to be important for the exam, as well as provide a few practice questions. And by the end of this week, it's already done, so I can post it now, actually. So I'll try to do it after this. There will be a sheet that'll basically say, know these topics from this chapter, know these topics from this chapter, know these topics from this chapter. Not entirely comprehensive. You could get like a question outside of that, but it's fairly comprehensive of everything. And it's going to be, and I'll post this on Canvas, it's going to be in room 242 in the North Hall, which is this building. And we got lucky. Last semester, I had to bounce around computer labs every test because the rooms were all taken. This year, every exam will be taken in room 242 in the North Hall, except for the final, which we take on paper in person. And usually I have like a third of the class actually take it because everybody else drops it. So, any questions for me? Was everybody able to that wanted to be able to go on the YouTube and have the video? I don't know if anybody here had to. Everybody had so many problems with Canvas and Blue Book. I just started, after this lecture is recorded, I literally upload it to a YouTube channel and I put the YouTube channel on Canvas in the announcements tab. You can go there. They're there if you ever want to watch them. Cool. Thank you all so much. The current plan is to be in person next Monday, so I'll see you then.